The movie begins in a boxing ring where George Foreman faces Muhammad Ali. The scene then shifts to the gritty streets of Houston, Texas in 1960. Young George Foreman moves with his family into a dilapidated home, living in dire poverty with his siblings Gloria, Mary, Roy, and his deeply religious mother, Nancy. That night, Nancy divides a single burger among the Children and asks them to pray before eating. Mary shares her portion with George, and who is still hungry. Before bed, Nancy instructs George to follow Gloria to school the next day, encouraging him to do his best and avoid fighting. At school, George faces discrimination from teachers and students for being older than his classmates and from a poorer background. During lunch, a student mocks him for not having food, prompting George to lash out violently. He flees the school and turns to crime, narrowly avoiding arrest during a mugging. He sees an advertisement for Job Corps, a vocational training program, and shares it with his mother, who encourages him to enroll. Enrolling in the Job Corps becomes a turning point for George. He is impressed by the shelter, clothes, and food provided. He settles in, finding Converse shoes and a note from his mother. George struggles with some concepts in class, drawing laughter from classmates, but makes a friend in Desmond Baker. When his Converse shoes are stolen, George is furious. Desmond tries to cheer him up by expressing his efforts in getting brownies added to the school menu. George spots someone wearing his shoes and beats them, stopping only when Doc Broadus, the program's chairman and a boxing trainer, intervenes. Despite wanting to expel him for his record of school fighting, Doc sees potential in George and suggests he channel his aggression into boxing. Doc begins training George by arranging a match between him and Royce. Royce defeats George, but Doc encourages him to improve. With Doc's guidance, George refines his footwork and punching skills. He informs his family of his new interest in boxing, and his mother is concerned. In a rematch, George easily defeats Royce. George dreams of joining the U.S. Olympic boxing team, but Doc warns it might take years to prepare. Despite the odds, George earns a spot at the 1968 Summer Olympics, where his raw talent and determination lead to a gold medal victory against Jonas Sepulus, launching his professional boxing career. Relocating to Oakland, California, George meets Paula, a journalist, and falls in love. With Doc's help, he assembles a team including trainer and promoter Dick Sadler and former light heavyweight champion Archie Moore. George's career soars as he wins fights, and he marries Paula. In 1973, he secures the heavyweight championship by defeating Joe Frazier in Kingston, Jamaica. Despite his success, his personal life suffers due to infidelity. He hears Muhammad Ali mocking his boxing skills on TV, and he struggles with insecurity. His family visits, marveling at his success. Paula learns of George's infidelity and confronts him. In 1974, George arrives in Zaire for the Rumble in the Jungle against Ali. Despite public support, he meets Ali, who taunts him, but he doesn't retaliate. During the match, Ali uses the rope-a-dope strategy to tire George and ultimately defeat him. This causes a significant setback in George's career. More turmoil follows the defeat as he fires his trainers and Paula divorces him. George attempts a comeback by participating in a boxing exhibition, aiming to knock out 5 fighters in one day. He catches onto a fighter trying the rope-a-dope strategy and defeats him. Ali, attending as a commentator, declines George's challenge to a rematch. After the exhibition, Doc warns George about his rematch confrontation with Ali and gives him a letter from home. A turning point occurs when George's sister Mary's newborn falls critically ill. At the hospital, Nancy prays with the family, but George refuses to join. Desperate, he later prays for a miracle, offering himself in exchange for the baby's life. The baby survives, and Mary names him after George. In a 1977 match against Jimmy Young in Puerto Rico, George takes blows to the head, and after the match, he has a near-death experience that solidifies his newfound faith. He becomes a devout Christian and renounces boxing to become a preacher, to his mother's joy, but Doc's disappointment. Doc confronts George about his decision to quit boxing, but George remains resolute. He repents of his past actions and seeks forgiveness from both Ali and Paula. In church, he meets Mary Joan Martelli, and they form a connection. George starts preaching on the streets, facing mockery from passers-by. Undeterred, he declares that he will not return to boxing. George shows Mary Joan a closed-down church he plans to renovate, and she encourages him. Years pass, and George has built a new life as a preacher. He marries Mary Joan and starts a family. One day, Jalen's grandmother, a member of his congregation, asks George to train Jalen in boxing, but he declines. Later, he sees a TV announcement about two boys apprehended for attempted robbery, one of whom is Jalen. This incident inspires George to open a youth community center where he trains young people in various sports. A power cut disrupts the center, and George learns from his secretary, Roberta, that the power bill is overdue and Desmond is missing. At the bank, George discovers that financial mismanagement by Desmond has jeopardized the center. Facing the loss of everything he has built, he forgives Desmond, inspired by his mother's words. He confronts Desmond about the missing money, and Desmond apologizes. George turns to sell merchandise and TV advertisements to sustain the center, but he still comes up short and is forced to close it down. Determined to save the center, George decides to return to boxing. Mary Joan questions his decision, reminding him of his previous rage. George seeks out Doc, who is initially pessimistic due to George's age, but eventually regains faith in him. Doc challenges George to lose weight, and with the support of his family, George trains rigorously and meets the goal. Doc arranges a friendly match where George proves he still has the skill, though he is slow. Mary Joan has a dream where she sees George winning the heavyweight championship. Doc then arranges a match against Steve Zowski in 1987. Despite mockery from the crowd and Steve, George maintains a positive outlook and wins the fight. This victory marks a remarkable comeback, leading to numerous TV interviews. In 1991, George faces Evander Holyfield in the heavyweight championship. Although he loses, the earnings and a lucrative grill deal stabilize his finances. George's persistence pays off, and he secures a match against reigning heavyweight champion Michael Moorer. Motivated by Moorer's previous wins, George trains harder. In a thrilling fight, George takes several punches in 9 rounds. During the break, he reflects on his journey, realizing his greatest victories are his personal growth and faith. Despite the referee urging him to quit, George wins the fight against Moorer, regaining the heavyweight title at the age of 45. He prays after the match and is celebrated by his coach and fans. The film concludes by highlighting George Foreman's remarkable transformation and enduring legacy.